I think we are seeing as a result of this conflict the potential for something of a power shift in the world as a whole.
Now, though, as we heard there, Russian President Vladimir Putin has thanked the Chinese president for his balanced position on Ukraine as the pair hold those talks in Uzbekistan. The two leaders are holding their conversation at the annual Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, the first since Russia invaded Ukraine in February. Let's talk to Professor Mark Galeotti, a Russia analyst, former advisor to the Foreign Office. Mark, good afternoon to you.
Hello there.
So one imagines, expects Putin would be looking for help from China if it can be obtained because he obviously needs it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be perfectly honest, the Chinese haven't been giving him any help whatsoever. Look, from their point of view, this is a very unfortunate war. It's worth remembering they are massive investors into Ukraine. They also get a lot of their corn from Ukraine, which is clearly a flow that's been blocked. And more to the point, the last thing they wanted to see was Western military cooperation galvanized, Western defense budgets deepened, and so forth. So, although there's all the atmospherics, in practice, the Chinese have been no help to Putin whatsoever.
Yes, interesting that just that phrase chosen by Vladimir Putin to describe his conversation with President Xi, taking a balanced position. That's surely a carefully chosen form of words. It does not add up to full-throated support for the invasion, does it?
Absolutely not. This is it. I mean, you're absolutely right. I'm sure that there were speech writers working late into the night trying to work out the best word to use. And that is the most positive one because that's what the Chinese themselves claim to have. They're trying to say, look, it is not that we are aligning with any bloc. We are, frankly, the sort of the grown-ups in the room. Particularly to the global south, they're trying to present themselves as the sensible ones while the Russians and the West chew each other apart. So in this respect, again, Putin was locked in by Xi's own, frankly, his official line.
So if we can take it then as read that though Vladimir Putin would like such things as extra weapons, he needs extra weapons in this war. He's not going to get consignments of weapons from China. What about other badly needed supplies, Mark? I'm thinking really of microchips. Russia very seriously short of microchips for its weaponry and its military equipment. Apparently, it's said to be taking microchips from refrigerators to try and fill the gap.
Yeah, and even here, again, the Chinese not giving him any help. We've already seen, for example, that Chinese companies are now restricting or ending their supply of mobile phones to Russia, precisely because they're aware that they can be cracked open and the microchips taken out of them. So, I mean, in this respect, yes, there are things that China can do. In some ways, it's acting as a money laundering for Russia. We're seeing sort of flows going through the Chinese banking system because no one wants to try and sanction that. We're seeing the Russians basically selling everything they can to the Chinese to raise money, so particularly oil and gas, for which the Chinese, it's worth saying, gouge a healthy discount as a result. Again, the Chinese, from their point of view, not doing any favors, and the Russians are just picking up on what they desperately can.
Yes.
Instead, this is why they're having to, for example, turn to the North Koreans, of all people, to buy artillery shells from. It's not that China doesn't produce them, it's that China isn't selling them.
If we take it then that what China wants at any given time is an opportunity to expand China's influence and power in the world, to what extent is China likely to be looking for an opportunity to extend that influence and power over Russia at this time?
This is the big nightmare for a lot of people actually in Russia. I mean, it's interesting. Look, from Putin's point of view, the main enemy is clearly the West, and everything has to be subordinated to that struggle. But particularly when you're talking to people who are just a bit younger, and I'm not talking about 20s, I'm talking about 50-something and early 60-something year olds. From their point of view, their long-term fear is precisely China. And I remember once talking to a retired Russian military officer who'd been in the general staff, and his view, and I think this is about 2015, was that in 20 years' time, Russia will have either have become an ally of the West of some kind, or it will have become a vassal of China. And I think this is precisely the option. It's not actually, I think, the Chinese are sort of have some grand plan. It's just that the gravity of China's economy is such that a weakened Russia cannot help but spiral into its grip.
Yeah, I mean, there are other good reasons, Mark, aren't there, to keep a close eye on this Central Asia summit. In particular, the position of India, the position of Turkey, and both of those countries of this ambiguous relationship, to put it that way, between Russia and the West.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important reminder of the fact that we have a tendency to think of this as if the entire world is involved, and this is basically Russia against the world. And again, go back to it, particularly in the global south, that's not really the case. And there's a lot of countries that are frankly thinking, look, a plague on both your houses. We are annoyed with the implications for our own business and trade. And for countries like Turkey, which is a NATO member but a fairly sometimes inconvenient one, and like India, that is clearly at the moment sort of seeing itself as having a chance to rise. From their point of view, what this is doing is it's breaking up the old order. And that gives an opportunity for regimes that are able to be sometimes unscrupulous, sometimes fast moving, but certainly can basically pick up some of the pieces themselves. So I think we are seeing as a result of this conflict the potential for something of a power shift in the world as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, this gathering, I've seen it described as a dictators club, and sometimes described as a kind of counterweight to NATO. But it's not that, is it? Because these countries don't have any common security commitment. So, given that, what do you expect to come out of this summit?
I think that on one level, there's just going to be the usual language about the fact that the West can be a bully and we're against that and so forth. Russia will make sure that at least it gets some words that it can use in its own propaganda. In practical terms, what we're actually seeing again is a shift in the balance of power. If you look at take Central Asia itself, where this is taking place, for a long time Russia was the security guarantor and China was the investor. That you went to the Russians to look after your interests in terms of your borders, but obviously you let China buy whatever it wants. Well, Russia's no longer able to provide that. So increasingly we're seeing China inevitably filling that vacuum. So I think what we're seeing out of this is in some ways the Shanghai element of the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement becoming all the more important. What was once an alliance of dictators is increasingly now becoming China's vehicle for building its relationship with a whole variety of other nations, some which are allies, some which are frenemies, but nonetheless all ultimately are in their own ways looking to China as the rising power.
Yeah, so interesting to get your thoughts. Thank you. That's Professor Mark Galeotti there.